Hello everybody, I am Jarrett Ross, the Genie Vlogger, and welcome back to another video where I review your DNA and genealogy questions. If you would like to have a question that I answer in one of these future videos, be sure to go to my subreddit, r/GenieVlogger, and post your question there. But let's jump into it. All right, we have which ethnicity estimate should I believe? Now, real quick, I should say for anyone else posting questions for me, try to avoid putting so much stuff. I mean, this is a lot. So, we're going to try to go through it, but I really have to limit myself on, time. Quick backstory of my ancestry. My dad's mother is 50% Polish from her mom. My dad's mother is around half English with some German and other Western European ancestry from her father. My dad's dad has a lot of German with some of this German ancestry coming from a location in southeastern Germany. He was said to have Native American, but I'm pretty sure this isn't true. My mom's dad is half Norwegian and half Scottish, German, Western European, and British Isles. My mom's mom is a quarter Swedish, a quarter Scottish, about a quarter German, and the last quarter is from somewhere in Europe. So basically, based on what this person is telling me, they're going to be expecting a huge hodgepodge of different European readings, and even more since they seem to have a big mix of both Northwestern European and Western European, and then Central European, that German and Polish, going to be expecting just within those readings a lot of variation. Now, with all of that population migration throughout all of these areas, and even more the constantly changing borders within those areas, it's going to make it almost impossible to be able to define these types of things. And I can almost already guess that all of the variations that you've posted up top here are probably all going to be slightly similar, yet seem different enough, mostly in just the fact that each company is reading all the population groups differently and defining them differently. This is where it really gets to the point for me of admixtures where it's pointless. I get that it's fun and a lot of people do enjoy it, but when you're looking at all of these different things, it really isn't that great, because you could look at your family tree and then you get an actual story of what was happening, whereas this is just going to give you a very vague general idea, and when that vague general idea is already dealing with a lot of complications, yeah. Continuing. How do I discover which of my ancestors were Jewish, if there are any? My mom believes that the Jewish may come from my mom's mother. She based this simply off of the fact that she had dark hair and eyes. But none of the last names sound Jewish, so I'm not sure if this is true. It is a possibility that my mom's dad's father had Jewish ancestry, but I highly doubt this. My great-grandparents' close ancestors had lived in the southern US, where the great-grandma, my mom's mother, had close ancestors who lived in places like New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. But my great-aunt's Ancestry DNA results show no Jewish, so maybe her sister, my grandma, doesn't have Jewish ancestor. Should be around 12%. My mom's dad has Jewish ancestry. Now, right off the bat, if you have Jewish ancestry, and being that you have your mom tested and your grandma's sister, your great aunt tested, that's giving you a lot of ammo to look into things, and you would likely expect Jewish ancestry showing up in your admixture, because it does stand out quite well against almost all other population groups. So when you do your DNA, you really want to look at the oldest generation, just like you mentioned, your great aunt, and we would expect European Jewish to show up, or however that company is defining it. So here we see the results for your great aunts. I'm guessing they're the ones on the right. I'm not 100% sure. But either way, there's no Jewish coming up in this. So if there is Jewish ancestry, because it certainly could be possible, it would have to be so distant that she's not picking anything up, which means that it's going to be at least a fourth great-grandparent, but more than likely much further, assuming that that even exists. Now, a real quick aside is basing it off of the fact that there's dark hair and dark eyes is a terrible idea, because you could use the same thing and say, oh, well, maybe they're Sicilian, or maybe they're Greek, or maybe they're North African, or maybe they're Middle Eastern, or maybe they're Asian, or, it doesn't really say anything. You have to go by what you actually see in the record. And a lot of people will use features to come up with ideas of ancestry, because you can get an idea of ancestry through features, but it's just an idea. You can't get the fact of somebody's ancestry. So I'm seeing nothing pointing to any Jewish ancestry for you, at least through your mom's side. And then I think the main part of this question, lastly, how do I know which ethnicity estimate is more accurate? Is my mom 57% Scandinavian or closer to 82%? Does my dad have Polish ancestry, or were those ancestors really Germans living in Poland, which my paternal grandma believes, but I doubt because I've traced the family back several generations in Poland? Does my mom have a small amount of Jewish ancestry? So one thing to say real quick, does my dad have Polish ancestry, or were those ancestors really Germans living in Poland? That's going to be something that's going to be pretty much impossible to tell just by the admixture. Yes, it could be indicative if you have more German reading than Poland, or there's certain regions coming up, but there's no way to tell for sure just because of the fact of how genetically similar a lot of Germans are to Polish people, and the fact that the population migrations have gone all over and there's a lot of genetic connection between them. And then choosing which ethnicity estimate is more accurate is going to be really difficult. I mean, you use the example here, is my mom 57% Scandinavian or closer to 82%? Well, it's going to depend on how are they defining those population groups of Scandinavia, because maybe one company is only considering Finland, Norway, and Sweden, whereas other companies are including those as well as Denmark and Belgium and the Netherlands, or maybe they're also including parts of Estonia and Lithuania and Latvia, and maybe they're not giving a Baltic reading. Or there is that question too. Is one company giving you just Scandinavian and then another company is giving you lower Scandinavian, but you all of a sudden have a Baltic reading or some sort of Central European reading? So jumping through some of these results of yours, here we see 36.1% English, 21.9% East European, which that East European could cover your Polish or your Germanic ancestry. Then you have that Scandinavian here, you have Irish, Scottish, and Welsh. And then here I see you do have Ashkenazi Jewish, 3.4%. So now looking at family tree DNA, we have Western European, 47%, Central Europe, England, Wales, and Scotland, 21%, Scandinavia, 18%, Magyar, 7%. And then continued, West Slavic, 4%, Baltic, less than 2%, Italian Peninsula, less than 2%, Ashkenazi Jewish, less than 1%. So I can see why you're thinking the possibility of Jewish ancestry. And then your Ancestry DNA results, 33% Sweden and Denmark. So notice here, they're not saying Scandinavian, they're splitting it up, Sweden, Denmark, Norway. So Sweden, Denmark, 33%, Norway, 24%, England and Northwestern Europe, 23%, Germanic Europe, 14%, Scotland, 6%. So you're not getting any of that Jewish reading in this one. So when you go back and forth and compare them all, there isn't a whole lot of variation. So here with your MyHeritage, we have 36.1% English. Well, when we go over to your Ancestry, we only have 23% of that England, but then we also have 6% Scotland. So that could be part of it. So going back here, we do have Irish, Scottish, and Welsh, 18.9%. And then beyond the Jewish, the biggest real difference is the fact in how they're defining all of these groups, which is then causing things to seem much more complicated. And especially when considering that it's the Northwestern European, which is always this big mosaic of English, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, French, German, Swedish, Scandinavian, all of those, they all have these big population migration connection. So all of that complication is really what's happening. So here we have that 36.1% English and 18.9% Irish, Scottish, and Welsh, which is adding up to be a big percentage. What is that? Over 50%. But then when we jump over here, it's 23% England and Northwestern Europe and 6% Scotland. But then when you look at the map, well, what's going on with all of these colored in green? Well, they're connected to Norway. And Norway, all of a sudden it's 24%, and Sweden, Denmark, 33%. So if we were just calling Scandinavian, that'd be 57%. But then we go back and, well, what's our Scandinavian? 19.7%. So where'd that Scandinavian go? Probably somewhere in that English, Irish, Scottish, and Welsh, but also could be in that 21.9% Eastern Europe. So when we jump back over here, we see 14% Germanic Europe. So is that part of the Eastern? What's going on with that? Because over here, we don't have German, we just have Eastern European. So you can see how these complications can happen just jumping back and forth through the test by trying to figure out, well, how are they defining what? So to be honestly blunt, there really is no true way to tell which one is more accurate. And to sum that all up, I'm going to go to the comment by Go Vera, who said, let's start with the last question. The results you can trust the most is the ones you can trace, the ones that match your family tree, and probably more importantly for you, relative matches, which basically they're saying if you're going to try to figure out which one is more accurate, you need to build out your family tree and see which one matches up most to what your family tree actually is. But then they go on to say, the admixture is probably the least important part for you, and it is never 100% trustworthy. I want to double down on that and say this 100 times because it really is such a major focus, because that's what a lot of the commercials focus on, but it is so useless when you really consider what can be done with these tests and genetic matches and building out your tree to see what your actual ancestry is. Prussia, culturally German, but genetically Polish. So some background, my maternal grandfather was born in the States in 1911. His parents were born in Germany and Prussia, and his father was born in the States, but to German Prussian parents. Grandfather grew up speaking German in the home. My great-great-great-grandfather was born in 1832, and it was he and his son who came to the States. I believe as refugees of sorts, because I believe that great-great-great-grandfather was forced to leave due to participating in the German version of the revolutions that took place across Europe in 1848. Every time either 23andMe or Ancestry DNA update their findings, my German DNA goes down and Polish goes up. At Ancestry DNA, German is no longer even detected. I know that my supposed German ancestors came from small towns that are located in what is now western and northwestern Poland. Is this a frequent occurrence for people who can trace back to Prussia, that while they are culturally German, the DNA says something different? I should also state that maternal grandmother was born in States in 1909 to Swedish-born parents. Also, when I first got 23andMe results, I did trace Ashkenazi results. Didn't surprise me because Poland, what are the chances that could possibly return in a future results update? The main thing here is that you are dealing with a big difficulty between how are they defining German versus Poland, and how good are their population groups that they're using, the population studies, to actually be able to define that. And the reason why every update it's changing is because they're getting more results, which then makes them change their algorithm, which then gives you different results. So the biggest focus in my understanding is not having people being defined by what they were ethnically necessarily. So it's more about where were they geographically. So your family may have been Germanic ethnically, but you say it yourself that where they were living is now part of Western and Northwestern Poland. So that means that you're looking at a place that is going to be defined as Poland because that's where it is now. So that's really the main thing, is just understanding how they are focusing on defining, because you're not going to know for sure because each company is going to try to define it slightly differently and there's going to be different things going on. But with each update, you're going to find that it's going to cut things out or things are going to change. And more than likely what's happening is that they're getting more studies of people who are in that western part of Poland, and thus they're defining those DNA segments as being part of Poland. But because those people are in areas that your ancestry comes from, even though your ancestry defines it as Germanic, well, you're going to share the DNA, they're not going to be able to tell, oh, did they call themselves Germanic Europe through the DNA? They're not going to know. They're just going to know that this DNA correlates to the people that are now in Western Poland. That's probably why it's changing. So looking at your results now, we have Northwestern European 80.1%, broken down to 50% Scandinavian, 15.6% British and Irish, 2.4% French and German. Notice it's not just German, it's French and German, but they are connecting it specifically to Berlin, which is a major thing. Then we have Finnish 2.1%, broadly Northwestern European 9.8%, and Eastern European 19.9%. So they're not even defining specifically Polish, they're defining Eastern European, but they are finding a connection to Masovian voivodeship in Poland. I know I pronounced that crazily incorrectly, so I apologize. But let's look, where is Masovian? Okay, so that's where Warsaw is, so not quite Western Poland. But for whatever reason, you have genetic matches where they have a lot of ties to here. Now, it does make sense because Warsaw is a big city, And whenever you're dealing with them tying genetic matches to certain areas, when you have big cities at the top of your list, you can have a little bit less confidence in whether or not your ancestry connects there, because it might not be your ancestry that connects there. It might just be that you have a lot of genetic matches who have ancestry that connects there, but not your shared ancestry with those matches. Now going back, I think there was a second. Okay, so this is the Ancestry, and Ancestry is giving 45% Sweden and Denmark, 18% Norway, 17% England and Northwestern Europe, Scotland 7%, Eastern Europe and Russia 6%, Baltics 3%, Finland 2%, Wales 2%. So here you're not even getting that German versus Poland, you're literally getting England and Northwestern Europe versus Eastern Europe and Russia. And you could probably even lump the Baltics in with that, because depending on how they're defining the Baltics, maybe your Baltic ties are to Lithuania, which is the most southern country in the Baltics, and right above where? Poland. And as for the Ashkenazi Jewish, my guess is you really don't have any Jewish ancestry, because if that was a small percentage and they've now updated it and it's gone, it's doubtful that it's going to come back. It's certainly possible. They may find some sort of tie with some segment that you inherited and then it might come back, but it's doubtful. On to the next one. This is my Ancestry DNA, and I don't understand because my mom is really dark, but there's no like African or Native American she always thought, or maybe I didn't pick up any. And then the results: Norway 32%, Sweden and Denmark 26%, England and Northwestern Europe 15%, Scotland 13%, Ireland 8%, Finland 2%, Germanic Europe 2%, Wales 2%. Well, yeah, you have no African and you have no Native American. And this goes back to the first question answered in this video about how people look. You can't use that to try to determine what your ancestry is. Sure, you may be able to get an idea if you have some features that, oh, well, why do I look this dark? But it doesn't always mean that you're going to be right in what you're guessing. So just because your mom is really dark, it doesn't mean that she has African or Native American ancestry. And it certainly is possible that maybe you didn't inherit any. And if your mom does a DNA test, maybe she'll get 1% or 2% or 3% of something, or she might even get, a higher percentage, because sometimes you might have a parent that gets, 6% something and then you get none of it just because of the randomness of recombination. But based on your results, I don't see anything that could indicate that. You could look at your genetic matches and see, do you have any genetic matches where they're almost 100% African or 100% Native American or 100% some other population group that's known to be darker skinned, then, maybe there is some sort of correlation, but based on this, it's really doubtful. My half-brother is trying to find his mother's biological father. My brother's mom recently passed away and she never knew who her biological father was. My brother took an Ancestry DNA test and he received a few second cousin matches, but nothing closer. What I found interesting was that my brother shared more centimorgans with one of the second cousins than he did with our paternal grandmother's sister. The centimorgans shared with all the second cousins are 648, 355, 288, 263, 246, and 220. What are these relations most likely? All of those matches share an Irish community with my brother also. So there's actually a really easy way to go about this. And I will say, with those numbers and your brother looking for his mother's biological father, so his maternal grandfather, these are really, really good numbers. And this is something that a genetic genealogist like myself would be jumping for joy at, because there is a high probability of being able to figure out how he is related to them. So first off, what are these relations most likely? Well, to figure that out, we can jump over to DNA Painter and specifically the Shared Centimorgan Project tool. So here we have that tool, and what you can do is go to this top part and just enter in those numbers. So starting out, we had 648. So we type that in, and then this is giving us what type of relationships we might fine. So these are all possibilities. And what you need to do is basically figure out how old is this person, and that can then help you to figure out how that relation is. So let's say that this person is the same age as your brother. Well, that would indicate that that person could be a first cousin, they could be a half first cousin, they could be a first cousin once removed, they might be a half aunt or uncle, especially depending on, how close in relation they are, because there are times where generations can have big gaps between when a sibling has kids and another sibling has kids. And then that can make it seem where, someone is a first cousin, but they're technically very different in age. Like on my dad's side, that happened to me where my second cousins are my dad's age and my second cousins once removed are my age. But also might be a half niece, half nephew, half great niece, nephew, and all these other ones. So this is an amazing tool, but there's also another tool, and I have to give a shout out to another YouTube channel for this, and that is DNA Family Trees. So that tool is the Centimorgan Solver. Now, I believe Larry from DNA Family Trees was the one to actually develop this, but this is a really cool tool to figure out how is someone likely related to you and the most likely path, but also showing single path, dual path, and multi-path. So single path is half kin, so if it's a half sibling or something like that. Dual path is full kin, so if like someone's a first cousin versus a half first cousin. And then multi-path, so endogamy, pedigree collapse, when you're dealing with that kind of stuff. And I personally, when I do this, I want to show probability map and show most recent common ancestors. You need to put in the age. So we don't know the age of this person, but we'll leave it at 50. Let's just assume the person's 50. So going back, we have 648. So 648. And then boom, we have this beautiful graph over here on the right giving us all these different percentages of what's the most possible relation, but then we get these different colorings. So remember, we have single path, that's the blue, dual path, that's the yellow, and then red is the multi-path. So basically, all of these are possible relations, and when we jump back over here, we're going to see that they actually all basically overlap. There's a little bit of a difference in some of it just because with the multi-path and the single path, it's defining a bit more, whereas this is not talking about any multi-paths, but you are getting single paths is just being defined as the halves. Half great aunt, uncle, half first cousin, all of that. But here, the beauty of it is you get a better idea of which path to go down. So these here are just giving us the most recent common ancestor percent. So what this is basically it's a guide of we go up this side, well, here's 80.7%, that's the highest probability, and then we go down this side. So what we're looking at for this 648, if they're 50 years old, you're looking at most likely a aunt, uncle, first cousin, or first cousin once removed. Now that's also where this probability map comes in, is it's using the age to give you a probability of which ones are on the most likely thing. So let's say that this person's 100. Well, if this person's 100, it's really doubtful that you're going to have very distant ancestry and be that closely connected. But then if this person is 10, it's going to be very unlikely that this person has a relation down here. So that's what this coloring is telling us. So if you do get the age, here we see 50, but let's say that they are 20, well, that's going to give us a little bit more of a possibility to work with. So these are two tools that you can use to figure out how is someone related to you based on the centimorgans. But when you have a situation like yours, where you have these 6 different connections and it seems that you're saying they're all related to the same community. So what you want to do from here is see if you can build their family trees, and even more, can you figure out how they're related to each other, and are they related to each other? If you are able to figure out how they're related to each other, you can use the DNA Painter Watto tool. What are the odds? So once you go over to the tools, go down and you can see what are the odds. I prefer what are the odds beta version 2 and do create a new probability. And what you do is you build out that tree. So let's just say that you figure out how they're related, and I'm just going to add a bunch of just random stuff in. So this obviously is not going to be the same thing. So I randomly put the 4 in spots that would kind of make sense on how they connect. And from here, what you'd want to do is you'd want to put in your birth year, or it would be your half brother's birth year. So let's say your half brother was born in 1987. So you do that, and then you hit suggested hypotheses. And now it's going to suggest where are the possible places within the family tree that your half-brother most likely fits. So this is telling you all the different hypotheses, and you can see here, right here, this is the strongest hypothesis. But with these hypotheses, every single one is technically possible. Even this one with a score of 6 is possible. Now, it is way, way, way less likely than this one, which has a score of 378,506. But one thing that they've added that really is nice is you can see in the pop-up about 2 times more likely than the next hypothesis. Now, I have done tutorials on how to do what are the odds and other things with DNA Painter. So if you'd like to check that out, be sure to check out this playlist right here. And if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. That really does help me out. You can also click right about here if you'd like to subscribe. It is completely free to do so. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at GenieVlogger. I'm the Genie Vlogger. See you in my next video.